Welcome. Thanks everybody for coming today. In mid-2024, as she grew increasingly critical of the Biden administration and increasingly involved with the Trump campaign, Tulsi Gabbard noticed changes as she went to the airport. She had more screening, federal agents with dogs showing up for her flights. Other federal agents followed her on the plane and reported back on her activity. When I learned of this, I launched an investigation into the TSA's Quiet Skies program and the Biden administration's weaponization of watch lists against everyday Americans. Under public scrutiny, the Biden administration removed now Director of National Intelligence Gabbard from the program, but they spent the remainder of their time in office stonewalling any investigation. Thankfully, that era is over. President Trump himself, a victim of government weaponization, set out to reverse the previous administration's targeting of the very citizens it is sworn to protect. Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem has taken decisive action to eliminate bureaucratic obstacles resisting transparency. We are finally getting answers. And now we know exactly why the previous administration fought so hard to keep us in the dark. Director Gabbard was surveilled on at least 5 domestic flights by federal air marshals under quiet skies. Internal records for her targeting show her congressional portrait and that she was a former congresswoman from Hawaii. So there was no doubt they knew who they were monitoring. Multiple concerns were raised internally, and one air marshal asked a colleague, "Why the heck is she a quiet skies suspect?" If this can happen to a combat veteran, a lieutenant colonel in the Army Reserve, and now Director of National Intelligence, it can happen to anyone. And it did. Today, for the first time, you will hear directly from a federal air marshal whose wife was labeled a domestic terrorist simply for engaging in protected First Amendment activity. Records show the FBI labeled her as a domestic terrorist for unlawful entry into the Capitol on January 6th. But she didn't enter the Capitol. She came for a public support of the president, and they knew it. Her phone location data did not put her inside the Capitol. Facial recognition did not identify her inside. She had no criminal record and no history of extremist views. What they did know is that this Catholic school teacher from Texas supported President Trump and went to Washington to attend his rally at the Ellipse. That was not enough for the government. That was not enough to label her a suspected domestic terrorist. For 2 years, her family was surveilled when they flew. This was not an isolated case. It happened to hundreds of Americans. It happened because the TSA used First Amendment protected activity as a predicate for watch listing Americans. That's unconstitutional, of course. First Amendment activity cannot be the sole basis for watch listing someone, but sole basis is an important caveat, and it's an opening the TSA exploited. Today, we will release internal TSA records that reveal how the agency authorized First Amendment activity to be used to justify the surveillance of Americans with no evidence and no recourse. Using broad and vague authorities, TSA deemed hundreds of Americans as threats to national security simply for holding opposing political views. The federal government used its investigative authorities, anonymous tips, and university research institutions to build a flimsy case to put them on the watch list. They didn't just coincidentally watch list hundreds of people who attended the same Trump rally. They did it intentionally and obscured the process to create plausible deniability. For example, documents obtained in my investigation reveal that TSA relied on data collected by the George Washington University Project on Extremism. Consider this. First, DHS funds the Project on Extremism, an external partner not bound by the same laws and regulations as federal agencies. Then, the Project on Extremism identifies supposed domestic threats by meticulously tracking January 6 defendants. DHS then uses the Project on Extremism reporting as evidence, sometimes the only evidence for putting someone on a watch list. But the abuses weren't limited to January 6th. The TSA also viewed skeptics of COVID mandates as threats. Simply removing a mask on an aircraft got 12 Americans watch listed. Records also show 3 current members of Congress, all Republicans, were included in the companion Silent Partner program, either as a sitting member or while seeking elected office. A cursory review would have revealed them to be either a member of Congress or decorated active or former U.S. military members. In fact, they were surveilled likely for activities that were official duties during their time in the military or in Congress. All of this was wrong, and I'm glad that these abuses are beginning to be exposed. I commend Secretary Noem for ending Quiet Skies, but our work is not done. We must make sure that this program does not come back under another name. Every official who directed or approved surveillance of Americans for protected speech must be removed from office. Full transparency must become the rule rather than requiring a year of investigation. The result will be a process that respects the Constitution, ends real-life shadow bans against Americans, and gives all of us the assurance that our government is focused on protecting us, not on chasing political ghosts. I now recognize the ranking member for his opening statement.
Well, thank you, Chairman Paul. Throughout my time in Congress, I have heard repeatedly from my constituents, particularly from members of Michigan's Arab and Muslim American community, about serious issues with the government's watch listing and travel screening practices. And while I appreciate the opportunity to discuss that today, I first want to raise some concerns about some other critical national security work that this committee is responsible for, but unfortunately the chairman of this committee has not prioritized. In a matter of hours, 2 critical Homeland Security authorities are set to expire. Cybersecurity information sharing protections that protect our economy against cyber attacks, and authorities that allow federal law enforcement to detect and mitigate threats posed by drones. We were scheduled to discuss these 2 bills to renew and improve these authorities 2 weeks ago, but unfortunately, the chairman abruptly canceled the meeting with absolutely no explanation. And while there is a 2-month extension for both authorities included in the continuing resolution, that is only meant to be a stopgap. The committee needs to do its work to reauthorize both of these pieces of legislation. But even though bipartisan leaders in the House, as well as the Trump administration and a bipartisan coalition in the Senate all support extending this legislation for 10 years, our chair, Mr. Chairman, you have not held a single hearing on these issues, and you canceled the only meeting where the committee had an opportunity to discuss them. These actions risk making our nation less safe. This committee should not simply walk away from its responsibility to actually be a leader in critical Homeland Security matters. And similarly, while I share your concerns about government being weaponized for political purposes, quite frankly, I find it odd that you have chosen to look backwards at this now that this program has ended, while at the same time, President Trump is openly directing the Justice Department to prosecute his perceived enemies by ordering also the closure of bribery, investigations into a political ally who's been investigated for bribes, taking bribes. We also recently saw the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission openly threaten the licenses of media companies over First Amendment protected speech. Mr. Chairman, I hope you will devote this committee's resources to conducting oversight of the current administration as well. Turning to today's topic, in December 2023, I published a report that demonstrated how well-intentioned screening practices have ballooned into a layered and duplicative system that sweeps up travelers who may pose no threat to national security, especially among Arab, Muslim, and South Asian American travelers. At that time, there were at least 22 different mechanisms that could lead a traveler to receive extra screening or be denied boarding. Americans must navigate this very complex system with no explanation of why their travel has been delayed or disrupted, and they have no real opportunity to fully redress what prompted additional screening in the first place. Congress doesn't even have a complete picture of the full scope of the system and the impact that it's had on everyday Americans. Almost all of the oversight mechanisms are internal to the executive branch, such as the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board and the Civil Rights and Civil Liberties Office at DHS. Unfortunately, with the administration's attacks on oversight, these mechanisms have now been gutted. eliminating one of the few checks and balances that Americans can use to protect their rights in this process. And that's why, following my report, I introduced, and this committee passed, the Enhanced Oversight and Accountability in Screening Act. It was the first real effort to provide more transparency and more oversight for this entire system of screenings. That's the topic today. This legislation requires DHS to reform the redress process and provide Congress with data on enhanced and secondary screenings by TSA and CBP, including their effectiveness. At the time, I asked, Mr. Chairman, I asked you to join me in working on this legislation, but instead you and the entire Republican dais voted against this transparency legislation. And I'm now working to update it now, and I would certainly love to have folks on this committee join me in reintroducing this updated version in a bipartisan way. As I've said countless times before, we must be able to protect our nation, but Americans who pose no threat to national security should not face a maze of travel screenings and a flawed redress process. We must bring transparency and accountability to our travel screening practices so that we can ensure government is effectively protecting our national security while also protecting our civil rights and civil liberties of travelers. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to introduce two things into the record. I want to move to introduce a minority response to the majority report into the record to clarify some of the information that the committee has actually received. It requires some clarification. I would also like to move to introduce my committee report from December 2023, identifying significant problems with the watch list and screening processes and calling for reforms that again passed this committee, but unfortunately received no Republican support for the reforms that we're going to be talking about here today.
Without objection. You got to love fake outrage. You know, if there was such great concern for these CISA authorities, last week the ranking minority member had a chance to vote for the CR, which extended these authorities, but he voted no. So, you know, fake outrage is great, but it's fake. As far as the reason why we haven't gone forward with the CISA reauthorization is because CISA has been associated with some of the worst and most egregious abuse of First Amendment. What we're talking about today with the Quiet Skies is First Amendment abuses. So we want to make sure that no one in government ever uses government again to go to Twitter or Facebook and tell them to take down stuff that's protected by the First Amendment. So it is integral. And we will continue to fight to make sure if CISA is reauthorized or any of CISA's activities are reauthorized, that there are First Amendment protections attached.
Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
You're conflating. This is not a reauthorization of the CISA as the organization. This is liability protections that have been in place for 10 years.
Right, so it's going to be First Amendment protections added to that.
These are,
and you've opposed
Chairman,
it, and that's a problem.
Mr. Chairman, this has broad bipartisan support. The Trump administration supports this reauthorization.
You had a chance to vote for it. You voted against it last week. So you voted against it.
And you voted against the reauthorization that I put up. You were the only objector.
You voted against it.
It has the support of,
I would suspect, 99
members.
And now preciously you're for it this week. All right. I now recognize.
You'll have a chance to vote again in a UC, Mr. Chairman. You're going to have a chance again.
It is, excuse me. It is the practice of this committee to swear in its witnesses. Will each of the witnesses please rise and raise your right hand? Do you swear that the testimony you will be giving before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God. Thank you. Our first witness is Mark Crowder. He's a senior federal air marshal with the U.S. Transportation Administration with over 20 years of experience. Before joining the Air Marshals, he served 4 years in the United States Marine Corps, 3 years as a uniformed police officer with the CIA, and 3 years as a deputy sheriff in Florida. Mr. Crowder, you are recognized for your opening statement.
Good morning, Chairman, Ranking Member Peters, and distinguished members of the committee. Okay, we'll try that again. Good morning, Chairman, Ranking Member Peters, and distinguished members of the committee. I'm going to start by reading a memo that I was advised to read by my management. The views I express are my own and should be construed as not representing the official policy or position of the Department of Homeland Security, Transportation Security Administration, or the United States. I've also been advised that whistleblowing is an official duty. With that being said, I will go into my testimony. Again, my name is Mark Crowder, a senior federal air marshal with over 20 years of service protecting the American people. In those 2 decades, I have flown millions of miles to safeguard our nation. Like so many others, I answered the call to serve after the devastating attacks of September 11, 2001. Driven by an unshakable resolve to ensure such a tragedy would never happen again, at its peak, the Federal Air Marshal Service embodied the highest standards in federal law enforcement, renowned for excellence in firearms, tactics, and specialized training. Today, I come before you to report that those standards have been eroded. The agency's once clear mission has been distorted by career bureaucrats and political appointees who prioritize personal advancement over the safety of our citizens. My testimony will expose how federal law enforcement agencies sworn to protect the Americans have been weaponized to target the very people it serves. On July 15, 2021, while serving in the Houston Field Office Operations Unit, I was monitoring special mission coverage flights in our area of responsibility. To my shock, I discovered that my wife, Christine, seated behind me, had been flagged in the FAM system as a domestic terrorist, falsely accused of entering the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021. I was horrified. I knew with absolute certainty that Christine was nowhere near the Capitol that day. My wife, who has a disability that prevents her from walking long distances, had simply exercised her First Amendment right to attend a rally for President Trump before returning to her hotel. As a federal air marshal with a top secret security clearance, I immediately reported the alarming designation to my supervisors, noting that according to their system, I was living with a terrorist, a clear insider threat. The special agent in charge, William Opperly, instructed me to remain silent and let the investigation run its course. Shockingly, no one expressed concerns about the potential compromise of classified information through my household. SAC Opperly was later promoted to senior positions within the agency. From July 2021 until April 2023, Christine was subjected to approximately 13 special mission coverages. Each time she flew, teams of federal air marshals surveilled her. She was barred from checking in on the airport kiosk, online, and forced to endure long waits at ticket counters for TSA's verification of her identification and to take control of her luggage. She is then subjected to invasive secondary screening at TSA security checkpoints. After the checkpoint, she is then searched again at the jetway by the TSA's Advanced Threat Local Allocation Strategy Teams, also known as ATLAS. This treatment extended to anyone traveling with her, including her elderly mother and our daughter, causing them both significant distress. In one particular disturbing instance, I was off duty flying armed with Christine. The FAM team assigned to surveil her that day had to coordinate with me, an armed federal air marshal, traveling with an alleged terrorist. How could an agency allow such a glaring operational and ethical conflict to persist? I only learned of my wife's designation because of my insider role within the agency. How many other innocent Americans have been falsely labeled as terrorists and surveilled without their knowledge? How many had their conversations, travel companions, and devices unknowingly monitored? With the assistance of Sonia Labasco and the Air Marshal National Council, I exposed this injustice and halted the surveillance of my family. At the same time, Quiet Skies missions and those targeting Americans who attended January 6 events, including public figures like Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard, dominated FAM's operations. These politically motivated priorities diverted critical resources and genuine security threats, betraying the solemn promises we made after 9/11. Never again. The events I've described are betrayal of American values. The weaponization of federal law enforcement to harass and intimidate citizens exercising their constitutional rights is unconscionable. Senior officials at the FBI, Department of Homeland Security, TSA, and the FAM service should have recognized these actions as beyond the scope of lawful authority and intervened. Someone fabricated false claims about my wife's actions on January 6th to advance a politically motivated agenda. Those responsible must be identified and accountability must be enforced to root out the corruption and restore public trust in federal law enforcement. Thank you for the opportunity to present my testimony.
Next up, we have TRISTAN LEAVITT. Mr. LEAVITT is the president of Empower Oversight, a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to strengthening public integrity through research, education, and providing pro bono legal assistance to whistleblowers. Mr. LEAVITT previously served as Principal Deputy Special Counsel at the Office of Special Counsel and the General Counsel. It's a lot of counsels of the Merit Systems Protection Board. Mr. LEAVITT, you are recognized for your open statement.
Thank you. Chairman Paul, Ranking Member Peters, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you so much for having me to testify today. Empower Oversight provides legal representation to brave whistleblowers across the federal government. We're honored to represent several air marshals, including Senior Air Marshal Mark Crowder here today. Mr. Crowder first came to Empower in 2022 through the Air Marshal National Council's indomitable executive director, Sonia Labasco, seated behind me. He raised concerns that his wife had been targeted for exercising her First Amendment rights alone. And if they truly considered her some sort of threat, why wasn't he walled off from seeing this information as he assigned missions of air marshals around the country? Despite his disclosures to the Office of Special Counsel, my former agency, and later to the DHS Inspector General, no meaningful investigation ever took place. That failure of oversight is exactly what allows abuses to fester. Ms. Labasco contacted us at Empower Oversight again in the beginning of August 2024, when air marshals wanted to blow the whistle on another disturbing case, the political targeting of Tulsi Gabbard through TSA's Quiet Skies program. The facts were alarming. Ms. Gabbard was added on July 23, 2024, just one day after she made statements to Laura Ingraham on Fox News, critical of Vice President Kamala Harris, who had just become the presumptive Democratic Party presidential nominee. Rather than using her passport photo as required, TSA officials used her official congressional photo, making clear that they knew exactly who she was. These initial whistleblower disclosures were reported by Wendy Strauch-Mahoney on Uncover DC and digitally on the Brianna Morello Show. Despite Empower's experience with the DHS IG failing to investigate the Crowder situation, we asked them to investigate here, and we also submitted disclosures to Congress. Members of this committee and others pressed DHS for answers. And your persistence, Chairman Paul, helped ensure Secretary Noem became aware of the Quiet Skies program and ended it. Ending Quiet Skies was a very important step and well overdue. But that alone doesn't prevent what happened to the Crowders. They were not a part of the Quiet Skies program. And a program like Quiet Skies could always be revived if we fail to learn the lessons. The first lesson is very clear. Civil liberties cannot protect themselves. Independent oversight is essential from bodies like this and others. Whenever government cites national security to conceal its actions, the risk of abuse rises, and only oversight can shine the light needed to stop it. In this case, much more light is needed as it relates to Tulsi Gabbard. On January 28, 2025, the New York Times published a leak from the government attempting to explain away Ms. Gabbard's placement on Quiet Skies. The article claimed that her placement was related to her attending a conference at the Vatican, supposedly because of another attendee on the watch list. But the article admitted that she attended alongside another former member of Congress, Mick Mulvaney, who invited her. If Ms. Gabbard was truly flagged for that reason, why wasn't Mr. Mulvaney also added to Quiet Skies when he flew back from the conference at the Vatican? The government's story just doesn't add up, and any credible review must answer those questions. Secretary Noem announced their review revealed, quote, the Quiet Skies program was used as a political Rolodex of the Biden administration, end quote. However, she provided few details. Reports indicate that at least one elected official had her husband removed from the Quiet Skies list with a single phone call. These issues demand a full accounting. That's why Empower Oversight recently called on the DHS Inspector General to complete its work and make its report public. Normally, Inspector General reports with private information are kept internal. They have information about personal individuals. However, given Ms. Gabbard's prominence, the allegations of political targeting, and the large amount of selective information the government already leaked, there's a clear public interest here in transparency. DHS IG has released similar reports before when public figures were involved. Accountability cannot be achieved if this is swept under the rug in a private report. In addition, the investigation must look beyond Ms. Gabbard's case. Anyone who abused TSA protocols to target or protect individuals for political reasons must be held accountable. A thorough report is necessary to propose discipline for those who committed misconduct. Finally, another of the most important lessons is that none of this would have come to light without whistleblowers. Of course, it was obvious to Ms. Gabbard that she was subjected to extra screening. But what she didn't know and would never have known was that she was formally targeted through quiet skies. Only courageous insiders willing to speak up made that possible. After their disclosures, and when we brought these things to the attention of the IG, TSA opened a leak investigation. Of course, this was troubling. The legal question of whether whistleblowers may disclose so-called sensitive security information to the media was resolved over a decade ago in the case of Air Marshal Robert McLean. When his case came to the Supreme Court in 2013, I organized for Senator Grassley a bicameral, bipartisan amicus brief arguing TSA's regulations couldn't trump the statutory guarantees of the Whistleblower Protection Act. A Supreme Court majority agreed with us, but TSA still sought to investigate our clients' disclosures as though they were unlawful leaks. That kind of retaliation chills whistleblowers across the government. TSA backed down when Empower exposed their investigation, but those kinds of risks remain. Protecting whistleblowers isn't optional. They are the first line of defense against waste, fraud, abuse, and overreach. If they are silenced, American people lose one of the only tools that can help bring abuses of power into the light. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Our next witness is Matt TAIBBI. Mr. TAIBBI is an award-winning investigative reporter and editor for Racket News. Mr. TAIBBI was a contributing editor at Rolling Stone, won a National Magazine Award, authored 4 New York Times bestsellers, and now writes on Substack as one of its most popular independent columnists in the country with tens of thousands of subscribers. Mr. TAIBBI, you are recognized for your opening statement.
Thank you, and good morning, Chairman Paul, Ranking Member Peters, distinguished members of the committee. Last year, former Hawaii Congresswoman and presidential candidate Tulsi Gabbard was placed in a surveillance program called Quiet Skies by the Transportation and Security Administration. She was subject to intrusive searches, followed by bomb-sniffing dogs, and trailed by 3 federal air marshals per flight. To cover the story, I contacted the TSA. They no-commented the main question about the truth of the story, but added, as if in mitigation, quote, simply matching to a risk-based rule does not constitute derogatory information about an individual. That's bureaucratese for, we can't say if Mrs. Gabbard was in the program, but if she was, don't draw any conclusions because we do this even to innocent people. Before Quiet Skies was discontinued by this administration, it was a symbol of the steep decline of federal enforcement since 9/11. The government spent $200 million a year following up to 50 people a day for a program that in its history never once led to an arrest or thwarted a single terrorist act. Despite its demonstrated inutility and grave civil liberties concerns, it was refunded year after year because this is what our government does now. It gathers information on its own citizens as an end in itself. In a week in which the question of whether federal security officials always tell the truth to Congress is back in the news, it's worth noting that it's now been 13 years since then National Intelligence Director James Clapper answered no, sir, and not winningly, when Senator Rod Wyden of Oregon asked, does the NSA collect any type of data at all on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans? Clapper later explained that he'd responded in the, quote, least most untruthful manner. That episode solidified a principle that holds in America today. If you lie about mass surveillance programs, even under oath, you not only get to keep your job, you get to be hired as a professional truth teller after retirement as a national security analyst for CNN. If you try to tell the truth, on the other hand, about the same issues, your options are prison or leaving the country forever. In those 13 years, Americans have become numb to surveillance. It was once a core principle that government couldn't or shouldn't spy on its citizens without predication. Now, much of the country accepts as inevitable the idea that every move we make is being recorded and analyzed. We know emails and phone conversations, at minimum, are being collected passively, and mountains of data we leave behind as our lives move increasingly online, from geolocations of cell phones to GPS tracking to travel, banking, and medical records are increasingly fodder for an overt or covert acquisition by federal analysts. As Google admitted last week, federal officials partnered with companies not just to monitor speech, but to suppress it on a grand scale. Quiet Skies was the paradigmatic example of a program that could take endless liberties with the Constitution because it was secret. When you gather information with no intention of ever going to court, as the TSA did with Quiet Skies, you never have to justify yourself to a judge. This leads to a lot of what one court recently called the exact sort of general exploratory rummaging that the Fourth Amendment was designed to prevent. This is a betrayal not just of the public, but of people like Mr. Crowder, who've been trained for important work, but have been forced to do intelligence work and gather information on fellow citizens instead. As former Marshal Robert McLean put it to me, the Air Marshal's job is to protect the cockpit, and the pilots let somebody else do the intelligence. One FBI agent I interviewed a few years ago said the distinction between people who believe bad thoughts and the people who do bad things has been, quote, completely lost in our government since 9/11. Once you start down the road of collecting information on innocent people, it creates the intellectual justification for doing it again and again and again. All this information gathering reverses the natural political order, giving elected officials undeserved and unearned power over their bosses, us, the voters. It's time to stop being numb to this outrage. Let's hope the elimination of Quiet Skies is just the beginning. Thank you very much.
The committee now welcomes Jim Harper. Mr. Harper is a senior non-resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. His work there focuses on digital privacy, privacy law, and select constitutional issues. He has written several amicus briefs in Fourth Amendment cases before the U.S. Supreme Court and has published articles in a variety of law journals. Mr. Harper, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Chairman Paul, Ranking Member Peters, and members of the committee for the opportunity to testify before you today. I'm happy to return to a committee where I was a counsel for a short time early in my career under the chairmanship of Senator Ted Stevens. Having established that I am old, I also want to confess to being slightly embarrassed for all of us that my written testimony submitted to you spends as much time as it does on the problem of counterterrorism security policy, which still plagues us nearly 25 years after the attacks of September 11, 2001. I wish that by now we had better systems in place for assessing risk and calibrating our responses. I'm in the privileged position of working in a think tank that encourages me to call it like I see it, without reference to orthodoxies or partisan considerations. That's the American Enterprise Institute, where I'm a non-resident senior fellow. This morning, the president of AEI asked me a lot of questions about my testimony, and I said, you can't ask all these questions. I'm gonna have to change my opening statement, but I'll proceed. The testimony I have submitted to you is a sincere effort to summarize what my study over years has produced in terms of strategic counterterrorism and the security systems by which a free country should address a particularly difficult challenge. Doing security well is an American nonpartisan interest. There are partisan valences to this hearing, of course, but there is opportunity here because communities and people sympathetic to both sides of the aisle have now experienced the negative consequences of watch listing, including in this Quiet Skies program. In writing my testimony, I kept coming back to the theme that watch listing is a security and constitutional half measure. Watch listing is a system for interdicting people whose activities do not raise sufficient suspicions to merit actual interdiction through full investigation, arrest, and the levying of criminal charges. By doling out minor punishments and derogations on freedom unilaterally, watch listing defies our constitutional separation of powers, in which law enforcement is supposed to bring charges to be adjudicated in the separate judicial branch. Watch listing violates due process and derogates from the presumption of innocence, treating people as guilty of something without providing them an opportunity to challenge that assessment. In my written testimony, I placed Quiet Skies in a context as a form of overreaction to terrorism, which as a strategy seeks to trigger victim states into error. The waste of blood and treasure is the clearest error and a win for terrorism. Here, a program costing hundreds of millions of dollars to achieve essentially nothing. Terrorism seeks to knock victim states off their ideological moorings and to delegitimize them. You don't have to believe in a deep state cabal here, but you can recognize that Quiet Skies and other watch listing programs open our government up to the charge, which is delegitimizing. I also supplied in my written testimony material on terrorism risk management that was produced by the Department of Homeland Security's Data Privacy and Integrity Advisory Committee in 2006. The DHS Privacy Committee itself was one effort to create some balance at DHS. The privacy impact assessment process is another. They have a role not to be dismissed, but I don't think internal counterweights do enough to bring balance to security programs. Our tradition is to use tension among branches of government and among agencies to bring balance. And in the latter part of my testimony, I broach a few methods for improving the institutional and policymaking dynamics so there would be fewer or no more Quiet Skies programs. First, Congress could delegate power from the DHS. We can understand the haste and uncertainty that produced broad delegation of power in the aftermath of the September 11, 2001 attacks, but that era is past, and you could specifically authorize programs that you find to be effective, deauthorize the ones that you don't see as clearly and cost-effectively securing our country. Oversight hearings like this are an appropriate response. Public and judicial oversight are important checks that help produce balance. Here, secrecy is a perennial and confounding problem. Daniel Patrick Moynihan's book, Secrecy, The American Experience, argued that secrecy leaves policymakers less informed, it denies government accountability, and it sharply limits public debate about policy and government conduct. An additional proposal I offer is to have the Congress recognize travel as a right equivalent to other rights in the Constitution. Were it recognized clearly as a right, courts would be in a better position to help administer the issues that come before it, and people would be able to challenge security programs that threaten their liberties. Finally, I argue that privatizing at least some parts of travel security would produce good results. Liability rules, the insurance system, and competitive pressures are things that government programs do not have to help guide them. We're in a time of welcome openness to change at the Department of Homeland Security under Secretary Noem. Quiet Skies is gone. The shoes-off policy at airport checkpoints is a thing of the past, and there are signals that the liquids rule, another overreaction, may be reconsidered. Let's see more to revamp airline security and counterterrorism policy so that threats are in perspective and directly met while Americans remain free to travel in possession of all their rights. Thank you.
Our next witness is Mr. ABED AYOUB. Mr. AYOUB hails from Dearborn, Michigan, and is a graduate of the University of Michigan and the University of Detroit Mercy School of Law. He currently serves as the National Executive Director of the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee, an Arab American civil rights organization committed to defending the civil rights and civil liberties of all Americans, including advancing due process and equal protection. Throughout his career, he has worked to address issues impacting Arab and Muslim Americans in the United States, including matters related to discrimination, surveillance, profiling, and most relevant to this hearing, watch listing and screening. Under his leadership, the ADC Legal Department successfully assisted and provided pro bono support to thousands of impacted community members across the country. You are now recognized for your opening remarks.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Paul and Ranking Member Peters, for the opportunity to testify. My name is ABED AYOUB, National Executive Director of ADC. We were founded over 45 years ago by former Senator James Abarizik. Throughout that time, we have worked and assisted countless members of our community who have been directly impacted by government watch list process. And let me start off by saying something that may surprise some people, but I have sympathy and I feel really for MAGA supporters, for Republicans, and for anybody that's going through and experiencing the fallout of the watch list issues. That includes missed flights, repeat screening, frozen bank accounts, job consequences, and much more without notice or a fair way to challenge it. I don't need to share their politics to understand that rights and liberties aren't conditional on agreement. What they are experiencing today mirrors what Arab and Muslim families have endured for decades. A secret designation that follows you from airport to employer and sometimes to consulate, with no clear explanation and no reliable fix. That is not a problem. That is not a partisan problem. It's a due process problem. When the government can quietly tag one group, it can quietly tag any group. Left, right, neither, just depending on who holds power. The answer is the same for all of us. On the watch list, or at minimum, implement safeguards that protect our liberties and rights. Quiet Skies was a total disaster. ADC welcomes the decision by the Secretary of Homeland Security to shut it down. Retiring a program that surveilled ordinary travelers without evidence of wrongdoing is a meaningful step towards fairness, but Quiet Skies captures only part of the story. It is a window into faulty surveillance architecture, secret lists, vague criteria, and downstream sharing that harm people who have done nothing wrong. For decades, the watch list system has too often been a shortcut for suspicion aimed at my community members, not because of what we've done, but because of who we are and what we believe. People get flagged after visiting family overseas, donating to lawful charities, attending a protest, or simply for praying. That's not security, that's punishment for religion and politics. More than 98% of the names on the FBI's 2019 screening data set were Arab or Muslim. Placement on these lists does not require an arrest, charge, or conviction. Instead, it is based on vague suspicion, often tied to religious practice or, again, protected political speech. And again, let me be clear. If a tool can quietly target my community members today, it can target any community tomorrow. Journalists, activists, immigrants, gun owners, union organizers, pro-life, or pro-choice advocates. Once a secret label replaces proof, the only limit is who's in power. If you won't end the watch list, then at least cage it with real notice, evidence, hearings, and strict limits so no American's faith or viewpoint becomes a reason to be treated like a suspect. Placement on the watch list has a direct and dire impact that reaches beyond the airport. These harms underscore why there must be reform to allow for the redress removal from the list. The tracking of screenings and assurances of appropriate oversight, because the human and policy costs are real. The task is larger than ending one program. We got to take immediate steps to implement due process measures to afford those on the list an opportunity to be removed. Many experts and opinions, many of them here today, have provided a clear roadmap to fixing these immediate issues, such as requiring TSA and CBP to systemically track all screenings and outcomes so we can see where the system fails and who's being hit the hardest. Second, direct the National Terrorist Screening Center to report regularly to Congress on nominations, removals, error dates, recall of bad data, and with safeguards to protect privacy while exposing a pattern of bias. Third, pair transparency with teeth. Have mandatory timelines, independent review that can order a delisting. The most urgent fix is transparency and due process. If the government is going to restrict your liberties, you have the right to know why. DHS's redress inquiry program, TRIP, provides little information to travelers about why they are flagged or whether corrections are applied across the system. Without systemic tracking, bias can go unchecked and travelers have no meaningful way to collect errors. Today, individuals on the watch list often receive no notice, no explanation, and no meaningful way off the list. There is room for bipartisanship on this issue, and I'm confident of that. I'll meet anyone halfway on this. Left, right, it doesn't matter, because the watch list isn't about who you voted for. It's about whether the government has to prove its case when it takes away your rights and limits your life. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, eliminating quiet skies was necessary, but it's not sufficient. We need to restore transparency, accountability, and due process to protect millions of travelers and Americans. We stand by and ready to assist in that effort. Thank you.
Thank you all for your testimony. We're going to start a round of questions, and we will start with Senator Ernst.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for calling today's hearing. For years, I've been highlighting examples of government mismanagement and waste with my monthly Squeal Awards. And the TSA's Quiet Skies program, unfortunately, was a prime candidate for such an award. $200 million a year was spent on a program that was weaponized by the Biden administration to target political opponents, including patriotic veterans like former Congresswoman, now Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard. The program covered over 180,000 flights since 2018 and did not stop a single terrorist attack, as many of you noted. I thank Secretary Noem for ending this wasteful boondoggle of a program and ensuring that TSA and DHS resources are used effectively to focus on keeping air travel safe rather than spying on and harassing law-abiding citizens. So, Mr. Crowder, I will start with you. I am so sorry to hear about the political targeting by the Biden administration against your family, and I thank you for your service to our fantastic country. Your testimony highlighting TSA and federal air marshal resources being diverted to track and harass the families of those sworn to protect Americans and make air travel safer shows what was wrong with the awful Quiet Skies program. But this program is not the only boondoggle that has existed under TSA and DHS in recent years. Since 2017, the DHS Inspector General has highlighted unresolved recommendations about how Federal Air Marshal Service contributions to aviation security are questionable. So questionable, in fact, that as much as $394 million is being perpetually misused. Mr. Crowder, can you share any suggestions for TSA and DHS safety changes you and your colleagues might have?
You say we haven't shown to stop anything. Back in the 80s, there were air marshals. There was a significant number of them trying to stop hijackings. That number dwindled down to approximately 33 before 9/11. Had the agency stayed the course, maybe that would have been prevented. It's not how many air marshals and how many flights we're on, but the terrorists not knowing which flight we're on. So I don't want to downplay our role in security of the nation. But as I testified, a lot of things were abused with Quiet Skies, January 6th, things of that nature need to be addressed. Does that answer your question?
It does. So what you're saying basically is follow the guidelines as the federal government had laid out for air marshals and not get into the business of intelligence, following, surveilling those passengers that might be targeted by the federal government. Can that be a takeaway?
Yes, the abuse for political reasons need to be stopped.
Okay.
Needs to be intel driven.
Very good. Thank you. And Mr. Leavitt, where are the TSA and DHS employees who were working on the Quiet Skies program now? Have they moved into other programs? Does the agency still employ them?
Well, Quiet Skies is just one of several programs that fed into creating what is called special mission coverage. And so, there are still air marshals being deployed around the country. Of course, this is just one of their several missions. At TSA headquarters, they still have other reasons, other criteria for which they are putting people on lists and other things. So no, we don't have any reason to believe that any staff have been laid off or anything because the Quiet Skies program was finished. They just diverted another work, and we hope that it's work that actually protects the American homeland.
Wonderful. And I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here today and sharing those personal stories. I think it's very important. And I want to just take in the remaining time I have left to once again thank Secretary Noem. Over the weekend while I was at home in Southwest Iowa, I ran into a U.S. Marshal that had been part of the apprehension of an illegal migrant that had killed a young Council Bluffs woman 9 years ago. He had fled to Honduras, back to his home country. And through Secretary Noem, DHS, and through Secretary Marco Rubio at the Secretary of State, through those two departments, they were able to extradite that man from Honduras, and he is here seeing justice, finally, after 9 years. So I want to thank the administration for doing that. But when I ran into this U.S. Marshal over the weekend, he said, rarely do we ever see justice. And in this case, we're seeing justice because of the administration and their follow through. So thank you for allowing me that, Mr. Chair.
Senator Peters.
Mr. AYOUB, one of the issues that I've heard again and again from people in the community and others is just how broken the redress process is for people who believe that they're unjustly or mistakenly caught up in the watch listing system. Mr. Crowder, I understand your wife, my understanding is not on Quiet Skies. She was put on the watch listing, the terrorist watch list program. So the redress process is really important. We still have that program in place. We need to have reforms, which was part of the work I've been doing and the legislation that I had that we did pass out a committee to deal with redress. But given your experience working with individuals who believe that they're on the terrorist watch list, what recommendations specifically do you have for this committee? What should we be doing right now So it doesn't happen to Mr. Crawler's wife in the future. It doesn't happen to the folks that you hear from regularly and I hear from regularly back in Michigan.
Thank you for that. Look, the redress process in the DHS TRIP program is flawed. It doesn't always work. It doesn't give you the reason why you were put on the list, and it doesn't give you a final decision. You fill out your information online and you get a letter back saying some vague language like, we've received it. We can neither confirm nor deny that you're on a list. And it's not always effective. So we need to work to find ways to expand that due process, expand the option of being removed from the list, look at what existing programs are there we could take advantage of, which could review individuals coming in. You want to be proactive. If somebody's on the list, again, set up a proactive way for them to reach out and be removed. We have, my colleague at the end, who's a U.S. Air Marshal, who has far more access to being removed, still took him, a couple years to be removed. So imagine a regular individual going through the same thing is going to take much longer. But what we've learned through our practice is when we can identify that one piece of information or that one agent that place that piece of information in there and then have a conversation with them, interview the client, and once that piece of information is removed, then the issue's gone. But it's going to be impossible to do that for 2 million people. There's just not enough agents and resources to go around. So finding a streamlined way, a streamlined due process measure, maybe building on DHS TRIP, that should be first and foremost, and dwindling down the list, and then also possibly maybe going through the list to at least purge the names of folks that have died, or children that are like 4 or 5 years old, right? Remove those names so you're working with a cleaner set of data to begin with.
Right. Well, I've certainly heard a lot from community members about the negative experiences, as you mentioned here, with the screening system. But just like today's testimony, which is powerful, I appreciate the testimony. These are anecdotal accounts, and we could come up with an awful lot of anecdotal accounts. But one of the recommendations in my report, and a big part of my bill, was requiring better and more complete data from CBP and TSA on all their screening practices, because there's like 20 plus programs. We're talking about one that's gone away. We still got a whole lot more of these things that are out there that need to be addressed. This is a big, big issue. So my question for you is, what do you think having better data, exactly what's happening to understand whether these processes are effective and whether there's bias, intentional or not, political, whatever it may be, we need data. What's your sense of that?
Absolutely. I think there should be data. We should be able to look at that list and determine why this person was added. Then at the end of the review, you'll find out, okay, were these, this group of people, do we have this many individuals added because they're Trump supporters or because they're Democratic Party supporters, right? We need to be able to read that. We need to be able to know why they're on there, who they are, what trends, and to determine what mistakes are being made. Because again, it can go just depending of what administration is in office, who's going to be targeted. And, our community for past quarter century, for past 3 decades or so, we're thankful enough to be targeted by all administrations. So we can tell you the experiences through Republican and Democrat administrations. But the reality is there are trends, there is bias, there are folks on that list that need to be removed. Expanding that option, expanding the way to do that, and having those data points, having that data set will also help develop policies and strategies moving forward to enhance and make the security process and the screening process better.
I'd just like to follow up, because this could happen in all administrations, both parties, whatever. This is a
Correct.
problem. We've got to make sure there's full transparency,
Correct.
there's oversight, regardless of who's in office. And most of the oversight in these systems currently is handled by internal DHS offices. The Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board, as well as Inspector Generals who oversee this. However, unfortunately, this administration has basically gutted all of the oversight. So we don't have the oversight anymore. Can you describe the consequences of eliminating internal oversight will have on American civil rights and civil liberties with regard to screening and watch listing? So all of the issues that are being raised by everybody here today, we have to make sure that we're guarding against that. What are your thoughts?
Look, oversight is very important. The issue was bad with a functional CRCL office at DHS, and you can imagine it's be a lot worse with no oversight. So having that office, having some sort of mechanism there is important.
Senator Moreno.
Mr. Chairman, as I mentioned to you yesterday, I really appreciate putting on this hearing. I think it's really, really important. I think if the American people read everything that was provided for this hearing, their minds would be blown. I think some of the stuff that's in here is sensitive information. We should maybe think about maybe daylighting that, because I've never read something more outrageous than reading that memo. So it's pretty crazy. So You mentioned just now to my colleague from Michigan that the oversight is essential. How did oversight work out in the last 4 years of the Biden administration?
It didn't really work out.
Okay,
But
gotcha.
how there were,
So it's not a question. So it's not a question of oversight. It's a question of intent. Because here's the reality. I think Americans would be appalled to know that their government was spying on them, not just spying on them, paying people like Mr. Crowder, who you didn't take the job to go walk around airports monitoring bathroom habits and coffee habits of American citizens. And yet your government was paying you to do that, to spy on American citizens, violating the Fourth Amendment, shredding the Fourth Amendment. You know, one of the things that I had to do to become a U.S. citizen was learn a lot about American history. I had to read the Constitution. My mom convinced me that the citizenship test was going to be impossible, so I memorized it. And everybody talks about what Joe Biden says is the thing. You know the thing, life, liberty is, he couldn't even repeat it, so he called it the thing. But after the end of that sentence, there's a line that says, the government is deriving its just powers from the consent of the governed. Deriving their just powers from the consent of the government. Mr. TAIBBI, do you think that over the last 4 years of the Biden administration that they derived their just powers from the consent of the governed? Do you think Americans knew that they had somebody stalking them at airports and bathrooms and coffee shops and watching who they were talking to on airplanes?
Senator Moreno, thank you for the question. No, I don't think so. In fact, as a reporter in the last 4 years, it's been very frustrating investigating not just programs like Quiet Skies, but also issues like censorship. It seems like there are only 3 ways that you can get important information. One is through whistleblowers like the ones represented by Mr. LEAVITT. Another is through investigations like the ones by this committee. And the third is if an eccentric billionaire decides to hand over a ton of material to a reporter. It's become almost impossible to get information about these abuses. And I think what I was trying to get at with my opening statement is that particularly in the last 4 years, the government has taken the position that the citizenry, they're all basically suspect until proven innocent, and it should be the other way around.
Well, that should be the other way around. That's the foundational principles of this country. That isn't up for debate. There is no law that we need to pass. That's in our Constitution, in our Bill of Rights. And Mr. Crowder, I'm going to shift to you for a second. I was out of the meeting. I had to go to a banking session, so I apologize. Could you point out your wife real quick for me? Raise your hand. Has anybody from the U.S. government apologized to your wife? So they haven't even bothered. Nobody in the government has bothered to pick up the phone, send a letter saying, we are very sorry.
Nobody.
Well, let me say that to you on behalf of the United States government. Apologize for what happened to you. It should never happen to any American citizen. It's a total and complete disgrace that the previous administration weaponized this. You mentioned, Mr. Crowder, this is a result of 9/11. How many American citizens were involved in plotting at 9/11?
0 to my knowledge.
So what problem are we trying to solve? Meaning, if the auspices of this were, look what happened, we can never let another 9/11 happen, why the hell are we having Americans surveyed at airports and on airplanes? And Mr. TAIBBI, you mentioned something else. During the COVID era, let's not forget how insane that was. Do you remember what that was like? Like you get on an airplane, you had the mask on. We saw people dragged off airplanes because they weren't wearing a mask, dragged, like humiliated by the police, dragged off for the offense of not having a mask on. But when they served you, you could take your mask off to eat because it was the most polite virus ever in the history of humanity. They said, well, you're eating, so I'm not going to infect anybody right now. But when you're done, I'm going to go back to the infectious part. Those of us who had some level of like, hey, this is just stupid, said, we're not going to wear a mask. And that put you on a no-fly list. That got you banned from flying. Could you explain that?
Actually, Senator, it's worse than that. My understanding is that just for supporting a group that protested the wearing of masks on airplanes, you could be placed on a no-fly list or on a watch list by the TSA. That's in addition to the J6 category, which included people who were just suspected of traveling to the national capital region, not even of going into the capital.
You know, I don't make my overtime. Let me just make this comment. Mr. Chairman, you mentioned this to our ranking member who's not here to listen to this, but maybe he wouldn't want to. He has a choice, right, to extend CISA 2015 by voting yes for this continuing resolution today. But it's so important to him to hijack Republicans that even he's willing to say, well, this is not that actually important to me. I also find it decently ironic that when they had control of the House, the Senate, and the White House, that the report that he issued, he could have put that on the floor, right? I'm not wrong there, right? He could have put that on the floor and passed that.
Well, it's a good point because this is in response to my wanting to put First Amendment protections on the CISA extension. CISA was the agency. This isn't the authorization for the whole agency, but for some of their powers. And I've said, yes, we can let it go through, but let's add First Amendment protections to it. Why? Because the First Amendment protections were another department of government, some through CISA, DHS, some through the FBI, that Mr. TAIBBI knows a lot about because they were meeting with Twitter. And a lot of Americans still don't even know this, that the FBI was actually sitting in meetings with Twitter officials, that CISA was sitting in meetings. And so what I've said, if we're going to reauthorize CISA, which a lot of people want to reauthorize this particular authority, let's reauthorize it with an amendment that simply says government officials are not allowed to meet with them to take down constitutionally protected speech. If it's illegal, they can meet with them and warn them something illegal is happening on their social media. But things that are not illegal, that are protected by speech, why not put it on a must-pass piece of legislation? That's the only way we're ever going to get it beyond the other side is to do it. So you're right, it's fake outrage. They're outraged about this particular authority expiring, but they have every chance. They'll have another chance today to vote to reauthorize it, and it'll be part of the continuing resolution to reauthorize this particular facility.
But just super quickly, I apologize. Last year, when you weren't chairman, the ranking member could have put that bill on the floor and chose not to. Is that correct?
Yes. Senator Langford.
For the witnesses, thanks. Thanks for the work that you're doing to be able to continue to be able to protect the civil liberties of all Americans and for your service to the country. We are grateful as a nation to be able to have folks that are actually engaged in these ideas. All of us who flew on a plane during the time of COVID remember full well the experience of the mask on, mask off. I will never forget a particular flight that I was on that literally the flight attendant patrolled up and down the aisle the entire time like a prison guard, watching for anyone that lowered their mask at any point or that got on to children who were with a pacifier or with someone who was a crying baby to try to figure out some way to be able to cover that up. This is bizarre to be able to think about that, but to be able to think about our own government at the time was also trying to find people that disagreed with policy during that time period and would say, we want to try to find some way for you just not to fly because you disagree with us. Becomes an entirely different level. So for Mr. Crider, let me ask you a question on this. And Mr. Leavitt, if you want to be able to jump in as well, you can on this. Did TSA, how did they make decisions regarding the threat level of individuals on the mask mandate issue? Did they have a ranking for that? How did they determine what is the level of threat for an individual?
Okay. We don't know, and that's the problem. It's because things like this are secret, right? They're not the sort of thing that everyday Americans have insight into. They're not the sort of thing that air marshals, even flying back and forth in these flights, have insight into. And they're clearly not the sort of things that you have insight into. Right. So it begs the question then, who is writing this stuff, and how are we supposed to trust that it's, it has any basis? Clearly, people just expressing a concern about masks is outrageous for them to be put on a watch list.
Yeah. So going back to some of the things Mr. AYOUB was saying, someone who's visiting family in Pakistan, someone who was a missionary that was flying back and forth to a country that was deemed inappropriate to be able to fly back and forth to, was there a process to be able to actually have a human engaged in that decision making to say, hey, this person's visiting family members, this person was a missionary, this whatever it may be? Was there a human involved in that, or is it just a trigger? You were in a certain city at a certain place, so you're out, you're on the list?
Again, I can only testify to my wife's situation. I had specific knowledge she didn't enter the Capitol. How she got on that list, who said that she entered the Capitol, I don't know. That's well above our access.
I'll add to that. The TSA has tried to say this is just a rule-based program, right? And they give the impression almost that like some computer is just assessing, flight bookings and then spitting these out. But someone made the decision to put, for instance, Tulsi Gabbard's congressional photo on there rather than her passport photo. There was an individual involved, and frankly, someone needs to figure out who that is and ask them a lot of questions.
Yeah. Well, there's other members of Congress that have also been placed on the list as well on it. Just when we don't know why or what the reason was, it was just they're a threat. And so they've got to be able to be on this list. So TSA has policies that prohibit active collection of information about people. TSA is a receiver of information, not a collector of information. This is clearly TSA trying to be able to collect information. Was TSA in violation of the law? Because they're not managing information giving to them. They were shifting into the collection mode.
I mean, I'll take a stab there. I don't know. TSA has broad authorities, right? And so they don't treat this as intelligence, right? They don't say that it's intelligence as though they observed you doing something. They're just deploying the assets. So I think back to one of the points that's been made here, Congress has given TSA pretty broad authority. That might need to be looked at being constrained more further.
Mr. Harper, you want to be able to add to that?
Yeah, I won't be able to cite you chapter and verse, but the authorities in the Air Transportation Security Act are very broad. And so it's your intuition is correct that TSA should not be an intelligence collection agency. But if it decides it's going to go off in that direction, the language is so broad it can go off in that direction. That's why one of my recommendations is to bring TSA and other DHS authorities within bounds that Congress sets tightly.
Sharper, you had also mentioned something about a right to travel, and to clarify that. Tell me what you mean by that.
Well, I think we intuitively feel we have a right to travel. And there are cases from the Supreme Court that say, of course, you got a right to travel. You can move from one state to another and they can't deny you welfare benefits when you get there. There are other cases where a man in San Francisco wanted to fly to Washington, D.C. to meet with his representative. And in this case, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals found that you don't have a right to travel on your preferred mode of transportation. He didn't want to go through all the security nonsense, and so challenged there and said, no, you can take a train or you can drive if you want to go to Washington, D.C. A clear right to travel. The Americans believe they have it, but the courts haven't accorded it to them, would give them a position when they went to court where they could do discovery. And some of these things could be turned up. We could learn more about the programs. I think courts would balance well. Obviously, a court is not going to throw out a program that is provably cost effective. And they'll say, yeah, no, in this case, you do have this right, but the right is subject to regulations that allow for security. But the right does not give way to regulations and programs that don't do anything. The regulations and programs that don't actually produce cost-effective security. So that idea, I'm glad you asked about it. I'd like to give it more consideration. Congress can weigh in on that and say, well, no, this intuition of Americans that is somewhat backed by courts can be made a full right. We think it is in Congress. Let's have the courts treat it as such.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
When I traveled, during the pandemic, and we all travel several times a week, there were many flight attendants who were very nice, very pleasant, very sympathetic, and were just like me, unhappy with the mandates and really didn't want to go overboard. They would pass me notes, sometimes secretly, saying they were supportive. They didn't want anybody to know they might be supportive of things I was for. But it also brought out the inner Karen in people who just, and everybody knows this exists in a significant number of people in our society, the idea that given a little power, they really like it. And gosh, I never was a policeman, but I wish I were. And just the idea of just, all of this power, I have power over, and if you say a word to me, you can be put on the list. In fact, I have a TSA document, some here in my collection of documents, that says that disobeying a public health order is equivalent to, saying I'm going to take the plane down. I mean, you are a threat to the plane. You have now become a threat to the flight attendant. And that just brought out the inner Karen in a lot of people, and it became really unpleasant. I hated to fly every week, and I'm not somebody who's really that confrontational. I don't like, that's why I don't like it. I don't like to have the confrontation. But, you would have, sir, you're not eating your peanuts fast enough. You need to put your mask on in between each peanut. I mean, literally, that was happening on flights. And the ludicrous nature of there being any science related to that all of us with our mask off for 20 minutes while we're eating is somehow going to protect us from, having it on for 40 minutes when we have it off 20 minutes. And it turns out that none of these things had any science behind them, none whatsoever. And most of the masks they were recommending were masks that were ineffective. Cloth masks were entirely for show and completely ineffective. And yet the head of the NIH was wandering around with Washington Nationals cloth mask on as if it were of any value. But I think it's important to know how we got here. So quiet skies, you're right, Mr. Leavitt. We've gotten rid of quiet skies, but I'm not sure that helps Mr. Crowder or Christine. We're still not sure exactly how they got on the list. My suspicion is if she just shows up on the list, I'm wondering if somebody who doesn't like you saw her social media that she was in Washington on January 6th, didn't like your politics and says, I'm going to call the tip line. And then what recourse, and you'd have never known about it until everybody started, harassing her. But you to this day don't know how she got on the list, right?
That's correct, sir.
So that's a real problem. So what we're taking is, let's say I'm of a different political persuasion. I may not know your wife, but I work with you and I heard you say something about your politics and I'm of a different political bent. Why don't I just call in the tip line and say, because I heard you say she was there at January 6th, but she was at the Capitol, at the White House, not the Capitol. Not as if it really is a huge distinction, but there is a distinction. And so maybe just out of spite, somebody does it. Don't we have to have a way to fix where someone doesn't like you and put you on the list? Or maybe somebody has an animus towards Arab Americans and just makes his list. So I don't think we're nearly done with trying to fix this problem yet. There's also this silent program, silent partner program, where one of them was if you're traveling from Greece and you don't have a Greek name and you've been to Turkey or you've been to Syria sometime in the last 10 years. Well, what if that trip to Syria was because you were part of the armed services? Is there not somebody with a brain that's actually looking up and saying you were in the armed services, you were there, or have a relative there for, frankly, then have a good reason to have gone there? But I don't think anybody's taking the time to do it because there's just so many damn people to put on these lists, and then it's so hard. But half the time you don't even know if you've been named. I mean, you were fortunate. You were in a unique position, and I thank you for coming forward because you were in a unique position that you knew that happened. This had to have happened to dozens, if not hundreds of other people. With regard to secrecy, Mr. Harper mentioned this. I want to reiterate how much of a problem this is. We cannot analyze whether programs work because they simply say it's secret and you don't deserve to know. I've been asking, as the chairman of this committee, a couple of simple questions. Like I say, I travel all the time, so I get the good and the bad, and a lot of it's the bad of travel. I get stopped once every 2 to 3 weeks. And I don't think I'm being selected, but I get selected by the machine for random pat downs. I've been through the magnetometer. If I've made it through that and I don't have any metal on me, I want to know, now that I've been selected and I go through the advanced pat down and the whirligig machine, how many weapons and knives are you finding? Well, they sent me some long answer, but they didn't answer the question. I want to know how many. I think it's 0 because I've already been through the magnet. I don't have a knife or a gun. What are they finding when I go through? The other thing is when you go through the I call it the whirligig machine, you go through there, it always finds something that needs to be patted down. So I get a pat down too, but it never finds anything. So it must not be a very good machine if I get patted down every time and there's never anything there. I suspect that machine is actually targeting, not on me personally, but doing a random check to do a pat down on me by indicating that something there that's not there. They won't admit they're doing that, but I suspect they are doing that. But it all goes back to secrecy. They don't want to reveal the state secrets, even to the people who are supposed to be overseeing the state secrets. To give you an example of how bad it is, this isn't just this area. I've been wanting to read the church committee report from 1976. All right. It'll be 50 years next year and it'll be released to the public, but I'm not allowed to read it. And some of my colleagues are preventing me. On the Intelligence Committee, they jealously protect this information. And typically the people on that committee, with few exceptions, are in favor of more intelligence power and opposed to more scrutiny. There's supposedly a classified annex. I want to read it, and I'm being prevented from reading it. They've told me now I can individually read it, and it's a box. It's a room full of boxes, and they won't designate exactly what's what. And there's no index, but I can go read it. I can't read the whole entire, I need a whole staff. I'd like historians and other people interested in the church committee. But the church committee was critical of too much power to the intelligence agencies. Now I want to read something and I'm being stymied 50 years later. So secrecy is a problem. To Mr. AYOUB, the whole idea of accountability, of course, we need to find these things out. Most of the programs in government, it just doesn't go to this. Most programs in government that are authorized for a purpose are never reviewed. We have legislation that says if it doesn't get reauthorized, it goes out of existence. It should disappear. Reauthorization, and Senator Langford's been very active in this. Reauthorization should be about, does it work? We have like 82 housing programs. Everybody gets this idea, I want to help the homeless. Well, we've already done it 82 times. Why didn't study the other 82 programs to find out if any of them work before we reauthorize a new program? With regard to where we go from here, we're not done with this. I'm still appalled by the idea of outsourcing this to universities. So we pay the universities. Universities have no scruples whatsoever. So George Washington University here in DC has a project on extremism. Is extremism showing up on January 6th to support President Trump? I mean, really, we have to be a little careful of who we're giving the keys to this. And I think they did go after those people. The evidence is that the people on the mask list, there's a terror mask list apparently. So the people on the terror watch list for not wanting to wear masks, I don't think they were removing their mask. I think they were talking about it online. Let's don't wear our masks. Let's take our masks off on the plane and have civil disobedience. But we're still trying to get to the bottom of that because we don't actually have the names of the people on the list. That's all being hidden. I suspect there are also hundreds of other people that were put on a list because they were resistant to dictate from someone on a plane, to a flight attendant saying, wear your mask higher, you're showing a nostril and you should need to, hike up your mask a little higher. I think a lot of those people were put down as, potential disasters for the plane, dangerous people, and not necessarily for masks because they didn't want to list them all as masks. But we've got to do more. Every one of these programs has to be looked. You have to have recourse. You have to have redress. And I think that we can't just stop here. We have to look out throughout government, more transparency, more sunlight. I'm going to throw it back to Senator Moreno. I think has another couple questions.
Yeah. Mr. TAIBBI, you've been around the block, as they say, around the globe. You've seen authoritarian governments. What would be the American foreign policy reaction to a country that receives foreign aid, foreign assistance from the U.S. that did this to their own citizens?
Senator, I would hope that we would look negatively on any country that mass collected information on innocent citizens.
Surveilled their citizens,
Surveilled
put them on
their
watch
citizens.
list, prevented them from traveling.
Right.
Had a presumption of guilt, not a presumption of innocence. Like we would probably call them in and say, hey, we can't continue this relationship because you're oppressing your own citizens. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, I think that would certainly be accurate. I know that we've raised questions about surveillance of journalists in other countries in the past.
And that was happening, as the chairman just said, literally FBI agents sitting down with private companies saying, you must remove this person from social media. You must go knock on their door. Some of the stuff we're seeing in the UK, which I'm very proud of the fact that our vice president is speaking out against what the UK is doing to their own citizens, like persecuting them for social media posts. Yeah. That's pretty outrageous, right? So this was happening over the last 4 years of the Biden administration. You would say, in the history of the United States of America, we've never seen more of a tilt towards authoritarian rule than we did under Joe Biden. Between firing people who wouldn't get vaccinated, you couldn't get a job, you were somehow a bad person, we were masking 2-year-olds, we were forcing the injection of a experimental, I'll generously call it a vaccine. And if you didn't do that, and if you didn't carry proof of that with you, that somehow you're a bad person. That was a pretty dark 4 years in the scheme of American democracy. Would you agree?
I would agree. And there was also a radical shift in attitudes in this country towards whether or not we should have laws against things like hate speech. There used to be a small minority of people who believe that. Now it's become almost a majority of people who believe that. You mentioned the UK. I interviewed somebody last week who was arrested for speech over there. And to the chairman's point, They have a system that allows people to make complaints that result in criminal arrests of people for social media posts. And, that could have been our future here. And so that's deeply concerning to me.
And I'll jump to you, Mr. Harper. I'll let you answer this one. Do you think in the scheme of things for Americans, I think Americans would think that their freedom, their liberty, their constitutional rights given to them by our founders is important. Just quick question, yes or no. Do you think that's important, really important to American citizens?
It is.
And do you think that it's ironic that Democrats that chase cameras saying that President Trump is a threat to our democracy are not even here? I think the record should show, Mr. Chairman, who attended this hearing and who did not attend the hearing. Because you can't go out there and go on camera and say that President Trump, the person who ended the Quiet Skies program, the person who's reforming what's happened under the Biden era, there's nobody being threatened to be fired for not taking a vaccine. In fact, restoring individual liberty, and yet don't even bother to show up to a hearing, which I think this hearing, and I said this to you yesterday, Mr. Chairman, is the most outrageous thing I've ever seen in Washington, D.C. And yet they can't even bother. And I think it's one of those things where you decide what's important. Like when you're a United States Senator, you can decide what's important. I can be in this hearing. I can be in another hearing. I can be at a fundraiser. I can be golfing. I can do whatever the heck I want. That's kind of the crazy part about being a senator. You don't actually have to show up to win, but you do. And the fact that the Democrats basically virtually boycotted this hearing gives them zero credibility when they say that this president is moving this country authoritarian. Do you want to comment on that, Mr. Harper? Am I wrong?
Well, your question on the perspective your question gave, if this were happening in another country, what would we say about it? Very powerful, because Keir Starmer in the UK is saying everyone is going to have a digital ID, national ID program. In the United States, we oppose that. And the Real ID Act of 2005 continually fails to be implemented, and hoorah for us, because it shouldn't be. It should be repealed. Financial surveillance is a product of United States law that we export around the world. And if you took off the label Bank Secrecy Act and put a Chinese label on it, you'd say, aha, that's China. It's what we do, and it's what the U.S. has in the Bank Secrecy Act, again, that we export through the Financial Action Task Force. There are so many issues that we could get to, but that insight, we shouldn't be doing it here. We should be leading in the United States on civil rights and civil liberties. So all of the things we've talked about, the transparency, anti-secrecy, no to a national ID, the perspective in your question was really important and helpful, I think. Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, just one request from my perspective. There's been almost no accountability to what the government did to the American people during COVID, like almost no accountability. People who closed schools, who made little kids get vaccinated masks. Can you imagine what that impact's going to be? You have kids. What the impact's going to be long-term on 2, 3, 4, 5-year-olds that were forced to be masked for 5, 6, 7 hours a day, or removed. No accountability. Look, the most accountability was that the American people fired Joe Biden, thank God, and prevented Kamala Harris, which would have been even worse. But we do have the ability to go into the current administration and say who within Homeland Security still has a job that perpetuated these policies. Because in my mindset is anybody, especially the person who wrote that memo that literally made my hair stand up, how is that person still employed by the United States government? And I think we need to ask that question while we have an administration that actually wants to protect civil liberties, that actually wants to protect the American people. And we cannot just ignore this. And again, there's a lot of things that have happened that I've seen in my 8 months here in DC, but this report was so outrageous. And the fact that my Democrat colleagues have no interest in listening to this says it all. So thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for holding this very important hearing. And thank you for all the witnesses for being here. And again, Mrs. Crowder, truly apologize for what you went through. It's completely insane, not just to you, but anybody who had something like that happen to you.
And part of oversight is not vendetta or revenge. It's removing people who abuse the civil liberties of Americans. And so far, the court has been consistent in upholding the president's right to hire and fire people in the executive branch. I agree with you completely, because we need to make sure that these programs don't come back again. The issue of anonymous accusation reminds me of a scene that I saw in Venice. There's a lion's mouth, Boca de Leone, and the Doge was like the king of Venice, and you could anonymously just put it in there, but you could lose your head or be imprisoned for life by an anonymous tip. One of the evolutions beyond that is sort of the idea of due process, that you can't just be secretly accused of things. And I think there is a real danger to that. And I think that's what happened in this case. And if this is somebody who works still as an air marshal, that person doesn't need to work as an air marshal. If it was a colleague or somebody that tried to get your wife in trouble, somebody did it. I have a feeling that it's malicious, actually. And I don't have information on that, but we want to get to the bottom of that. And the people who created and ran all these programs, of course we do. And I think your point is well taken on human rights. We have all kinds of strings that are supposed to be attached to human rights. If you're not a democratically elected government, I've tried using that one before because there are many coups that occur around the world. We keep sending them. I mean, Egypt still lives under a military rule after a coup. Technically, they're not supposed to. There was something called the Leahy Amendments. They're not supposed to get foreign aid now, but we do it anyway. We just exempt them from the Leahy Amendments. But things that we would enforce on other countries, we certainly should enforce on others. There are big categories of people, Arab Americans, Muslim Americans, who have been abused by this stuff. But it really isn't always just either the color of your skin or the color. It could be the shade of your ideology. You could be a homeschooler or a Donald Trump supporter. You could be all kinds of things that may be outside some sort of mainstream. And to target those people is anathema to what our country stands for. I appreciate everything all of you have done in this. I appreciate your testimony today. And the records. I would like to enter into the record a set of redacted documents produced to the committee as part of this investigation. I'd also like to enter the statements for the record from the Air Marshal, National Council, and other stakeholders. Without objection, these records will be entered into the record. Senator Moreno, do you have any more questions? We have one senator that wants to come and ask a few questions, so I am going to wait another minute or two. Do you have anything else?
No. So just, Mr. Leavitt, you're an attorney. I'm not. So I'll ask you this question. If Congress passed a law called the Quiet Skies Law, what would the Supreme Court say?
They had the same substance as this.
Same substance. In other words, if we passed a law that said that the U.S. government can surveil American citizens who they suspect without any evidence of maybe committing a crime, and we passed that law, we all cheered and we passed it, and super bipartisan, and we threw a big party and had a ribbon cutting ceremony for the law and photo op, what would the Supreme Court say?
Well, two thoughts. One, we've seen past laws that aren't that different from that maybe, right? And so it's hard. And there is a balance, right? A policy balance. It's possible the Supreme Court, if it's not narrowly tailored enough, would invalidate that.
Because it's unconstitutional. Because we have a presumption of innocence in this country. Because if I decide not to wear a mask on an airplane because the rule is insanely stupid, I shouldn't be prohibited from ever flying again. If I want to travel to Washington, D.C., and I want to do whatever I want to do in Washington, D.C., that's well within the bounds of the law, that doesn't give any administrative agency the right to decide I can't fly somewhere else. It doesn't give the government the right to have somebody follow me and creep me out in the bathroom and decide whether I'm getting too many sugars in my coffee or if I'm going to the wrong yogurt place. And that report shouldn't be published inside some sort of official government document. Because, Mr. Chairman, there's a difference between somebody who has power because they're giving it to them because of some administrative things, or somebody actually real power. Somebody who has a badge, who has a gun, who has the ability to arrest you, has the ability to take your civil liberties away. That's what happened over the last 4 years. And Americans should be equally outraged about all this. It should not be partisan.
But I would interject that I think it's longer than that. And I think one of the witnesses mentioned this. This fear really originated after 9/11. So when they passed the Patriot Act, one of the things in the Patriot Act said that the government could go to your local library and give a secret warrant. It's not a Fourth Amendment warrant. It would be a FISA warrant. And they could get all of the different books that I read when I go to the library. All those could be confiscated a list. But they went even further. They said that you will put the librarian in jail if she reveals to me that the government is looking at my reading list. So we did a lot of things out of fear, and that fear from 9/11, look, there was anger, it was justified. There was a war, I think in many ways also justified, but we let down our guard on our constitutional liberties, and it's in times of fear you have to be most careful about them. We probably have 1 million Arab Americans in Dearborn. We probably have 10 million Arab Americans that are part of our country. Many of them are citizens. We even have Colombian Americans. They all deserve the same protections. That's many of the reasons why they came here.
So, but it is decently ironic that the Democrats looked the other way while our border was open to 10 million illegals streaming across our border.
I'll grant you that.
So I will turn things over to my great colleague from Missouri.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for holding this hearing, number one, but thanks for waiting for me as well. And thanks to all the panel for being here. Marshal, I want to start with you, and I apologize if you already covered this. I've been going back and forth to other hearings today, but I just want to ask you, coming back to your wife, did you find out, how did she get added to that database? Why was she flagged in the first place? And who did it? Do you know? I mean, at what level was the decision made?
That's still something we don't know. It's been unanswered after many attempts by several people.
Is your sense that it was an individual, this was a human decision, or is this some kind of an automated thing that based on information they collected about her, personal information, the fact that she was in DC on January 6th, that they tagged her, and then, too bad, she's on the list for years.
Your guess is as good as mine. She was obviously in the area on January 6th, where that prompted somebody to just put her on the list, or something else. We don't have the answers.
Yes, I mean, it's just unbelievable. I mean, it's a sickening violation of her First Amendment rights, obviously. I want to thank you for your service and thank your wife for what she's endured. It's just, you should never have had to go through it. And to be honest with you, what we saw in the aftermath of January 6th, the effort to persecute the president's political opponents, President Biden, that is, it's just unbelievable. I want to ask you, Mr. LEAVITT, if I can, just on that subject, tell me a little bit more about how the Biden administration used the Quiet Skies program, which had existed obviously for long before then, but really started using it to target political opponents. It seems like they found in this program a great opportunity to start turning the screws down on people that they didn't like, including, just ordinary folks like Mr. Crowder's wife. I mean, she wasn't running for office, she wasn't running against Joe Biden, but yet, my gosh, she found herself targeted. I mean, is this the United States of America or not? Talk to us about your understanding of how this happened.
After January 6th, it's clear, and you see this across a lot of agencies. We've seen this from FBI whistleblowers represented. The federal government took a stance, which was that a lot of people with certain political views were threats to our nation. And so that certainly manifests itself in lots of ways. And one of those was these different types of travel lists. So people who were there on January 6th, as has been mentioned, people that maybe were members of a group or expressed concern about wearing masks in public because of their effectiveness, were all put on lists like these. The most still unanswered example is Tulsi Gabbard being added to a list after she criticized Kamala Harris. And again, the TSA's self-serving, I can't say TSA, someone in the government self-serving leak to the New York Times said, no, it's okay. It was because she was associated with this person at the Vatican. She went to a conference there, but it clearly says Mick Mulvaney went as well. Many of you know Mick Mulvaney. He didn't get added to a Quiet Skies list when he flew back to the US. So it just puts the lie to the fact that this was the justification. So again, whenever you have secrecy, we've talked about all the civil liberties concerns, but whenever you have secrecy, there's also the additional threat that it will be used in secret ways to target people that go above and beyond just, well, we all have to endure it. It's part of being safe in America today. That's targeting, that's weaponization.
And it's kind of incredible, isn't it, that after all these years, to come back to Mr. Crowder's wife, we still don't have any idea exactly how she got added or who did it. I mean, so there's the evasion of accountability. You can't go and say, well, you know what, you're fired. You did that, that's an abuse, you're gone. It's the classic bureaucratic deep state. Oh, well, we don't know quite how it happened. It just so happens, though, that everybody who looks like they may have been politically of a different mindset than the last president gets targeted. I mean, who gets the FBI knocking at their door early in the morning? Is it people who are Biden voters? No, amazingly, it's not. It's people who go to school board meetings and ask about masking policies. Who gets the FBI SWAT teams at their door? Oh, it just happens to be pro-life folks who had the audacity to exercise their First Amendment rights by walking on a sidewalk. I mean, it is unlike anything I think we've seen in this country's history. Mr. TAIBBI, if I could just come to you, will you help contextualize this? I mean, we saw, and you've reported on this, we've seen abuse across a range of agencies. It wasn't just Quiet Skies, would it were. It was the FBI. It was the IRS. It was agency after, it was DHS, right? I mean, it was agency after agency. Just fill in the blanks here for us. Help us understand how this, what we're talking about today, is sadly just one piece of a massive, seemingly whole of government approach to try and delegitimize anybody who disagreed with the last administration.
Sure, and thank you, Senator Hawley. Just to Mr. Leavitt's point, there are a lot of similarities in the statements of the FBI whistleblowers that Empower represented and some of the air marshals that I talked to about this story. Both complained. For instance, there were FBI agents who just sat in vans outside the homes of people who might have been at J6, people who were pulled off details, trying to catch child pornographers to do that kind of work, who were extremely frustrated to be forced to be collecting information on innocent people. The same thing with federal air marshals who their job is to prevent terrorists from storming cockpit doors on airplanes. They think that's a very important job, but we're putting marshals in the backs of airplanes where they can't do any good at all, and having them listen to conversations of, former congresswomen from Hawaii and checking how many times they go to the bathroom. It's a total misallocation of resources, and it's politicized information gathering. And so I think it's a betrayal of both the people in these services and the American citizens.
Yeah, well, very well said. And I just have to say, I appreciate you holding the hearing, Mr. Chairman, because I think we've got to expose this so that it never happens again. The nearest thing I can think of in our country's history is we briefly in 1798 toyed with trying to outlaw political dissent, the Alien and Sedition Acts. That unhappy episode was resoundingly rejected by the American people in the election of 1800. And you would that was a long time ago now. You'd think that, we're past that. And really what we have seen in the last 4 years is unlike anything since that period, and much worse because the federal government is much, much more powerful than it was in 1798. The ability to prevent travel, the ability to monitor conversations. I mean, I can just think off the top of my head, you have the federal government telling the big tech companies they've got to take down and censor normal Americans who comment on COVID, who comment on masks, who comment on a CRT in the classroom. You've got the FBI designating parents who go to school board meetings as terrorists. You've got the FBI targeting pro-lifers. You've got the FBI recruiting spies into Catholic parishes. You've got the Quiet Skies program. I mean, that's just off the top of my head. That's like 6 things. It's unbelievable. And we talk about never forget. We've got to never forget this and make sure it never happens again. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The investigation is not over. We are today announcing that we will be investigating the project on extremism at George Washington University. We want to know whether or not they were doing research on people not wearing masks or against wearing masks, whether they were doing research on people who attended January 6th, whether Christine Crowder came from George Washington information that was sent over, or whether it came from someone specifically making up something about her. We are going to get to the bottom of it. We're going to keep asking questions. We're going to find out who did this and who caused such a great disruption to your life for several years. And you're the one we know about, and we're going to try to get to the bottom of who did this. But this is the tip of the iceberg. We hope that anyone who's interested in this will continue to give us information, that more people will step forward. And those of you who are interested in reform will participate with us in finding legislative solutions to try to make sure this never happens again. With that, I would like to thank our witnesses for joining us here today to share their testimony and expertise with the committee. The record for this hearing will remain open until 5 p.m. on Friday, October 3rd, 2025. For the submission of statements and questions for the record, the hearing is now adjourned. Thank you.